Okay, I know we do a lot of Led Zeppelin and Led Zeppelin related videos on this channel, but hey, it's Led Zeppelin. So, and I've got something, the thing that I have for you today is pretty cool. What I found is an interview that was done with Robert Plant a couple years after Led Zeppelin broke up. And what caught my eye is that it says this at the top right above the headline. It says, "The band's finished. Lead singer admits 2 years after drummer John Bonham's death." And then it says Led Zeppelin's Robert Plant breaks supergroup's silence. And I thought, this can be really interesting. I got to read this. And what it is it's just a very honest and personal interview with Robert Plant here in 1982. And it's pretty cool. There's just a lot of very just kind of insightful things as to what he was thinking at the time. And anyway, I think you'll really enjoy this. Now, when Led Zeppelin broke up, I was a little kid and I wasn't even paying attention. I was 10, 11 maybe when they broke up. I was just barely started. I was a Kiss fan, a little kid that liked Kiss. And this was before I started expanding into liking a lot of other stuff. But I remember when this solo album came out, Robert Plant's first solo album called Pictures 11, I've got it right here. This is one of my copies. Actually, this is one I bought at Angelo's CDs last time I was in Denver. I have a couple of copies of this album. When I bought it mainly because at the time I guess I would have been 13 years old. I knew who Led Zeppelin was. I liked their music. And I felt like I just should have it because it's the singer of Led Zeppelin. I didn't know much more than that at the time. So I bought it. And I'll be honest with you, as a 13-year-old kid, I took it home, I played it, and my first response to it is, I don't think I like this at all. And is this this isn't like Led Zeppelin, is it? That's the kind of stuff that's going through my mind. I was expecting something a little different, but I gave it, I listened to it several times. Part of what threw me was the first song, Burning Down One Side. I couldn't understand anything he was saying. And there's a few songs on this album where he just sounds like he just garbled. I don't understand what he's saying. Others he's very clear, but there's a few that are like that. But I listened to this over and over, and I eventually got to the point that I really, really liked it. I mean, it didn't reach the point of like mastery, like where I just couldn't get enough of it. Like there are some other albums that are just that good, but I really grew to love this record. It's the kind of thing that if I was driving somewhere and somebody said, "Hey, you want me to throw on Pictures 11?" I'd be like, "Yeah, let's listen to that. I love that album." So there's a lot of great stuff on here, but it is, for me at least, it was something I had to learn. It was something I had to, I learned to appreciate it over time. And there are a few songs on here, I'll tell you, that sound a little bit like what I would have expected Led Zeppelin to become had they continued, because you can almost feel a little bit of the energy of In Through the Outdoor on this album. You could feel like some of these songs would have been that next step where it would have gone. At least it feels that way to me. But there are a couple things, especially the song Slow Dancer. Slow Dancer is so cool. And it definitely has a Led Zeppelin feel to it. It is but anyway, I really, really like it. And then, of course, he had these really cool musicians on there, not the least of which, of course, was Phil Collins. I ended up seeing him in concert on the tour that he did once he'd put Principle of Moments out. But anyway, I think, again, this is kind of a long article. I've read about 80% of it, and the other 20% we will listen to together as I read this. So this is from the Gazette, July 3rd, 1982. And let's see here. And she gives kind of a little bit of an introduction, and then it gets into the interview. For the past 12 years, the words supergroup and Led Zeppelin have been synonymous. Everyone knows Zeppelin, the British four-piece band formed in 1969 by ex-Yardbirds guitarist Jimmy Page, the band that exploded onto the music scene with a debut album, Led Zeppelin, that sold more than 2 million copies and featured the rock and roll classic Dazed and Confused. Since then, Led Zeppelin has released 7 other albums that sold millions more copies worldwide. And the band has performed to vast audiences in nearly every country in the world. The group made 3 trips to the Montreal Forum in 1970, 1972, and 1975. Their songs Whole Lotta Love, Rain Song, Communication Breakdown, Kashmir, and many others are still staples on the airwaves. It's so funny to hear a list like that because you think, you know, if you're going to pick random songs, I mean, there's just so many. You got in so many different classic rock radio stations today, and it's like they're playing Zeppelin, and it's anybody's guess. It could be dozens of different songs that they would play. So it's just interesting to listen to which songs they pick out to kind of represent the band. In fact, their song Stairway to Heaven is a classic that is consistently played on more rock radio stations than any other album track. And yet, with all the fame and fortune, Led Zeppelin has been plagued by tragedy. In 1975, lead singer Robert Plant and his family survived a serious car accident in Greece. And if you go back and listen to, we have another video on this channel that's about Peter Grant, and it actually talks a little bit about this experience in that video. If you don't know much about it, you can go watch that video. 2 years later, Plant's 5-year-old son, Carrick, died of a mysterious infection. Still, the band continued. But when drummer John Bonzo Bonham died in September of 1980, the musical future of the surviving members of Led Zeppelin, Plant, lead guitarist Jimmy Page, and keyboardist bassist John Paul Jones was uncertain. Now, for the first time since the loss of Bonham 2 years ago, Robert Plant, 32, has broken his silence. This week marks the release of Pictures at 11, Plant's first solo LP, recorded with musicians Robbie Blunt, Paul Martinez, Jeff Woodruff, Cozy Powell, and Genesis drummer Phil Collins. Plant flew into New York for the album's debut, and in his first North American interview for several years, spoke of the status of Led Zeppelin, his own plans, and his feelings about his place in rock and roll. And then so this is the interview, and I'll just say question and then answer before each thing if you're listening, because you can read along obviously with me on the screen, but if you're just listening to it, you'll know what I'm reading. So the question: why a solo album? And then Robert Plant's answer: I didn't really have anything else to do. I know it sounds a bit lame, but when the band obviously wasn't going to work anymore, I didn't have a great deal of choice. I had to quit altogether or do what I did, which was to work in a little pickup blues band playing around England, having the time of my life. Question: what band was that? Answer: the Honeydrippers. We played small clubs, and it was ever so easy from about Valentine's Day 1981 through to that July. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing because if you're familiar with the Honeydrippers, they actually put out an album, I think a couple years after this, after Robert Plant's solo album. So even before Robert Plant put together Pictures at 11, he had put the Honeydrippers together and was just playing shows. So that's what he's talking about here. So this is before most of the rest of us in the world would have ever even heard of the Honeydrippers, because of course, when the Honeydrippers did put out an album, and I'll do another video on the Honeydrippers. I've got like 6 copies of the album in the other room, because it's a fascinating story in and of itself, especially how they have no mention really on the album of who's even in the group. It's pretty neat. Anyway, so that's what he's talking about here. And it's interesting to note that the Honeydrippers existed right after Led Zeppelin and before Robert Plant actually did any solo work. Who was in this band? Robbie Blunt, the guitarist on this album, and nobody else anybody's ever heard of. And nobody else, anybody has ever heard of. Question: was it a definite decision that Led Zeppelin was going to be no more? Answer: yep, it was unanimous. 4-piece bands have been known, scrolling to the top, through history as being really tight. If they ain't tight musically, they're not worth pursuing. So we were tight musically, and there was friendship and kinship. It had its ups and downs, but it really was superb. When a 4-piece is no longer a 4-piece, what motive, what right, what purpose would it serve to suddenly start elaborating on it? Question: so all the rumors we've heard about drummers Alan White or Cozy Powell joining the band were rubbish? Answer: poppycock. Nothing would replace John, and we weren't going to give anybody the opportunity. If you're in a situation that is of the heart, it doesn't make a great deal of sense to have to turn around and look at somebody else in the middle of a song. Question: didn't you consider working with Jimmy Page? Answer: The two of us together would have been just as close as we were before, but we both thought strongly that it was a good idea to go into different things. Jimmy had to go at soundtracks, and I think he did a great job and will probably pursue it. I'm more into baby, baby, baby kind of things, although there's only one baby, baby, baby on the whole album. And this is interesting, by the way, because they, of course, did end up working together. They toured together years after this as Page and Plant, or Plant and Page. What did they call it? It was one or the other. And then, of course, on the Honeydrippers album, the one we mentioned just a second ago, Jimmy Page actually did come and apparently played a little bit on that album. Was there ever going to be another Zeppelin tour after Bonham died? Answer: no, definitely not. That's how it is. The group's finished, and people go about doing what they have to do. Question: what were you thinking in terms of singing without the others when you did the solo album? Answer: well, what do you do when you're standing by yourself? What you think is, quote, what I want to do is break away, move it all to one side, unquote, which is exactly what we did with every Zeppelin album. Try to shift over, change gear, put it into four-wheel drive, like go from the second album to the third and move from resounding heavyweight to acoustic. I guess I thought it would be good for me, and I would feel a lot healthier about it if I could just depart a bit to the left or right vocally. And then I suddenly realized that I just can't do that. I just sing however I sing what is written, so I should have kept my mind open. Question: how did you put this solo project together? Answer: Robbie was in the Honeydrippers with me playing guitar. So that's kind of interesting. Robbie, this is referring to Robbie Blunt that he mentions over here on the other side. And this is the guy that played on, you'll see his name right there, Robbie Blunt on guitars on this album. So Robbie was in the Honeydrippers with me playing guitar. We were playing in these great clubs, real slinky clubs every night. After about 3 weeks, he said, I really wanted to play this music, but I'm getting a little tired of it now. And I agreed. We got to the point where we thought we could probably take it a bit further, but not with the same people we'd got. So we went into a corner, and we'd known each other long enough to be at ease to sit down and write, which was one strange thing for me because I'd been so used to working with Jimmy. I thought I was never, ever going to be able to be comfortable writing songs with anybody else, but it was just instant. It was great. Question: when you wrote songs with Jimmy, you mostly wrote the lyrics. How did it work with Robbie? Answer: it was more or less the same, although I probably played a bigger part in writing the music because I was allowed to play the guitar. Question: do you play guitar on this album? Answer: no, but I was playing when we were writing. Question: you weren't allowed to play the guitar with Jimmy? Answer: oh, listen to her. No, of course I was allowed, but I made such a noise that it was dreadful. This time I had clear-cut ideas of what I wanted to do musically, and as they got better and became more embellished, I put the guitar down. Question: how much were you influenced by the wealth of Zeppelin music? Answer: when you consider that there is an atmosphere in the studio or on record or in writing that I have been a big part of, creating it and going right down the line with it, the part that I subscribe to is obviously somewhere inside my little anatomy or in my head. Question: you had 12 years with Zeppelin. How could you not fall back on the old vocal techniques when making this album? Answer: because I was wearing the pants. That's actually, to me, when I read that, I thought that's actually a really interesting answer. How could you not fall back on those vocal techniques? And he goes, this time because I was in charge. Anyway, at least that's the way I hear that. And by the way, you listening to this right now, what do you think he means by this? That's really fascinating, that to me, in this interview, to hear him say that. Question: did that feel good? Answer: it was a hell of a responsibility that I'd never even felt like doing before. I just like to do my bit and then get out. On this album, most of the final decisions were mine. Question: did Jimmy always make the decisions when you recorded with Zeppelin? Answer: not as far as the voice went. it was always a collective thing. There wasn't a pecking order. In the beginning, he obviously had all the knowledge, and his opinion was far more valid because his sight was more far-reaching. As time went on, it became more shared. With this solo album, everyone's designs were used, but I more or less knew what I was looking for. Question: do you think that Zeppelin took the rap for what that whole kind of... Let me read this again. Do you think that Zeppelin took the rap for that whole kind of big supergroup, decadent, machine-type band? For a while, it seemed that Zeppelin was the band everyone pointed a finger at, wild tours and all. Answer: yeah, I think people tried to pin it on us, but I don't think we lingered long enough to get too caught up in it. Question: there was something so grand about Led Zeppelin, even when the younger punk bands were accusing you of being a dinosaur. If you were to come back now, it would probably be the same. Answer: I'm not an egomaniac, but we were good. As a four-piece, we had to put our backsides on the line and come up with the goods. There was an element of, quote, can they still do it? And that is an interesting thing when you look at the ultimate staying power of Led Zeppelin. Because, of course, I didn't become really familiar with them until Led Zeppelin was gone. And it's interesting to watch the following generations, because even my kids, and that's probably not fair using them as an example because they grew up around me and they were going to learn about it whether they wanted to or not. But there are kids, like here in the studio, I've employed so many young people. I mean, just a lot of young kids, college students, et cetera, in the studio. And they all knew what Led Zeppelin is. I shouldn't say all, but it's very common to still know Led Zeppelin and to know their music, to be familiar with their songs. So it is interesting. There was something really special about what they did, then that music, it's become kind of just, it lives well beyond them. Okay, question. Did you ever worry about that? Answer: it's very hard to look after a voice, but it's boring to talk about it. It's hit or miss, really, when you sing. Question: but what about getting up the energy and the enthusiasm to do it? Answer: oh, it's lovely. It's wonderful. Question: even still, after all the things that have happened to you and the band over the years? Answer: those things don't take away my enthusiasm to sing. All those years ago when I was a kid, that's what I wanted to do. I didn't know how I was going to go about it, but I was drawn to it, and I knew I should play the game, and that is not a lonely thing. It's a wondrous thing. Question: are you planning to tour with the musicians who played on your album? Answer: yes, eventually, but it's a case of suck it and see. I've never heard that term before. If you have heard that term before, I would love to get where that came from. And when you would have heard that before. Yes, eventually, but it's a case of suck it and see. Because when I read things like that, my initial thought, because we're looking at a newspaper, is that it's a misprint. Somebody, types that incorrectly, so it says suck it and see. Question: are you a better singer now? There seems to be less shrieking on this album. That's hysterical that she just asked this to him. Less shrieking on the album. And his answer is great. Answer: well done. You listened to the album. See, this was fresh, like a virgin, really. It was that new. I guess I was concentrating more on melodies. Question: if you toured, do you think you'd ever be able to get up on stage and not do Stairway to Heaven or other Zeppelin material? Answer: I wouldn't do it. There's no morals if you do that. You might as well go to Vegas and do it there with a resident band. That's not discrediting the people I'm playing with, but they weren't attached to it and they have no right to it. So it's interesting listening to that answer because the implication is that he'd never play the music again. But if you read something else into that, by the time he gets to the end of it, it's more about that he doesn't want to play it with anybody other than the people that were doing it originally because it would be wrong. It would feel wrong to do that. And so then I guess that's why, because when you read that, the first thing, at least I thought, is, well, you went off and played the music later. But I think that if you read that into the question, I think it would have been because he was then doing it with Jimmy Page, that the two of them owned that music or had done that music together. And then at other times, obviously, with John Paul Jones. Does it bother you that people are still interested in Zeppelin? Answer: obviously, I'm proud of it. It is now part of my past and your past. And we all had a great time. I mean, this sounds really lame, but my intention is to go with this and go with the next album. I mean, we've got 5 titles together for the next album. It's a keen working setup. And by the way, reading that answer right there, I'm sure some of the people that watch this video saw Robert Plant on that first tour that he did on Principle of Moments. And of course, he played no Led Zeppelin music at all. And he really was focused on, that was another time, that was another thing. I'm moving on and I'm focused on my solo stuff. And he stuck to it. He went, and when I saw him play on that tour, it was in a massive arena. I think it was filled, 17,000 people strong in that place. And it was interesting because why did they show up? Not because they loved this or Principle of Moments, although they were good. They showed up because it's Robert Plant and you just have to. And the same reason that Phil Collins went on that whole tour playing the drums for Robert Plant. Why? Because it's Robert Plant. And you know, even though Phil Collins was a huge rock star in his own right, when Robert Plant calls you, you go. And that's kind of the thing. And so he was able to just, on his name alone, even if you didn't like the music, and I ended up really liking it. But anyway, but you can hear that in there, that once he had left Led Zeppelin, at least for a while here, it was like full steam ahead. I'm doing my own thing. And he did do some, it was very different, but it was actually pretty cool. Okay, question. If you were going to tour, when would it be? Answer, I don't know. Nobody can go on stage and play completely unheard of things. If you do that, I would be putting my head on the chopping block. So the alternative is to make a couple of records, maybe 3, and then just casually have a go at seeing what it's like up there again. I think there's still a spot up there somewhere for Robert Anthony. So interestingly, that's what he did then, because I don't think there was any sort of a tour that he did on this album, on Pictures at 11, and then he put out Principle Moments. So he did do 2 albums, and then he went on that tour. And as I said a minute ago, you know, he did use Robbie Blunt was with him, and of course he had Phil Collins, not Cozy Powell, toured with him. But anyway, so he did that, 2 albums, and then went on tour. Question: how were you affected by the punk rock that happened in England in the late 1970s? Answer: I was very pleased that something had come along that threatened to bring loads of new life and new enthusiasm and accessibility again. Music on the street. That's where we started, and that's where I guess it all really belongs. It was healthy. And eventually, the same syndrome will affect these bands that affected us. Those who are good will stick around and their following will grow. Those who aren't will give up and go back to whatever they were doing. Question: did all that new activity in the 70s make you feel out of date? Answer: no, not at all. How could I feel out of date? If I go and write something that I feel is okay, where do I start dating it? I can't be old-fashioned. It's fresh, it's new, it's just come. All that, quote, dated stuff means nothing. It all comes down to how good it is. And the amazing thing is that now the bands of the street are in the same position that Zeppelin was in. They're all playing big stadiums in Europe. Okay, now we're getting close. It's almost over here. I just think some of this stuff is so, just hearing his little insights on this stuff is so interesting. Question: how do you feel about having been the sort of quintessential rock and roll sex symbol with all the onstage strutting, tight pants, bare chest, long flowing hair? Answer: well, you've got to do something in between soccer. I don't know, what can I tell you? I enjoyed singing, and what am I going to do? Stand there with a cup of coffee and a cigarette? When people are playing with that kind of energy, you have to express yourself. Question: do you think you're vain? Answer: no, of course I'm not vain. I mean, how can one be serious about all that? Question: plenty of rock stars are quite serious about just that, image. Answer: well, I had a spell for about a week and a half, but you have to really smile at it all. Bonzo used to say to me, it don't matter how you sing. You know, you can't sing that well from night to night. Just go out and look good. That's a great end for that article. I hope you enjoyed that. I find these things so interesting. Hey, and thank you so much for following the channel, liking the video, and leaving your comments. And if you, I'd love to hear your thoughts on not just this article, but what was your impression of the early days of Robert Plant's solo career? Did you have this album, Pictures 11, and what did you think of it? And the next one, and then did you see him on that tour, the Principle of Moments tour, when he was solo and all he was playing was just his own solo stuff at that time? And what was that experience like for you? And anyway, again, thank you so much for leaving your comments, for interacting with these videos, and hope you have yourself a fantastic day.